Alright, my darlings. Adult-themed animation has received quite a boom in popularity within the last 2.5 decades. And while of course adult cartoons have been around for years, starting with the rudimentary forms with Ever-Ready Heart-On and Betty Boop in the 1930s, and continuing with the German pornographic animations from the 1960s and 70s by David Grant, don't ask me how I know about those, I just do, alright? And then there were the Ralph Bakshi movies and MTV cartoons like Fritz the Cat and Beavis and Butthead.
I ain't no jive-ass black nigger, honey.
The 21st century has been the most prolific time for mature cartoons, such as great shows with South Park, Archer, Robot Chicken, and many, many more, proving that you don't just have to be a kid to enjoy cartoons. As I've been the living example of for many years now, but by far one of the best ones out there at the moment, and my personal favourite, is Rick and Morty. The genius idea of spoofing the classic concept of the wild-eyed eccentric scientist with his kid assistant is made all the more brilliant with the amazing voice acting and writing from Justin Roiland, plus Dan Harmon, and all the others who do such a great job in making a show that, on the surface, may seem like the most least-effort mess of swear words and gross-out humour, but much like Beavis and Butthead and South Park, it's so much more than that. In many ways a spiritual successor to Futurama, which in itself was sort of a spiritual successor to Red Dwarf, Rick and Morty takes all those familial sci-fi aspects from those shows and others such as Doctor Who, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and Star Trek and combines them and enhances them with one singular, ongoing phrase that sticks to the entire franchise. I don't give a fuck.
I don't give a f***. Just shake that ass, bitch, and let me see what you got.
But why just talk about how great the show is when we can talk about how great it is with individual episodes? This is my top 10 Rick and Morty episodes.
It's the Rick dance. It's the Rick dance.
Number 10. Morty Night Run.
Shut the f*** up about Moon Men!
This one's at the bottom for me because I feel that some of the jokes in this episode don't quite work that well.
Too late, Morty, the hole's opening. No, Rick, you don't understand!
And while there's always a few jokes that won't make some people laugh, this one had more bits that didn't really get to me than most episodes. But it's saved by one thing: the presence of the great Jermaine Clement.
I came here accidentally through a wormhole located in what you call get out of my head fart, I know you're in here, la 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 la.
As I've said in the past, I'm a huge fan of Jermaine Clement, and not only does he bring his amazingly versatile voice to this role, he actually is allowed to go full Flight the Conchords and sings one of his own songs.
Goodbye, moon man. You say goodbye.
Now you can't go wrong with that. Also, the subplot about Jerry, Morty's annoying dad, having his own interdimensional daycare for him is pretty hilarious in its own right, and it's a great testament to one of the things that Rick and Morty does best, in that the subplot can be even better than the main story sometimes, which we'll see plenty of examples of when we get near to the top of this list. But seeing Jerry being humiliated is always fun to see.
I got black! What do you want?
I got black!
I hate Jerry. And that's not because that in a Facebook poll I was told that I was more like him than any of the other characters on the show.
But if you can leave, then why are you still here? Same reason as you. We're Jerry's.
For the most viewed episode of Rick and Morty in North America to date, yeah, it's not too bad. Number 9. Close Rick counters of the Rick kind. And for those who are new to Rick and Morty, get used to those titles because it only gets stupider from here. This was the first episode to really make use of the idea of multiple universes housing multiple Ricks, and while they touched on this in Rick Potion number 9, this episode takes the idea and totally runs with it, showing how many different ways this guy can still be an arsehole in the whole of reality, but how ours is the biggest of them all, and that's why we love him for it. It's also the episode that explains why Rick travels around with Morty all the time, in probably the most blunt and harsh way possible.
Ricks have a very distinctive and traceable brainwave due to our genius. See, when a Rick is with a Morty, the genius waves get cancelled out by the, Morty waves.
That's probably why Luke and Nick hang around with me so much, actually. My new Who-loving waves cancel out their classic Who-loving waves so they won't get hunted down by the Moffat fanboys. Who am I talking about? Tune in next episode. While the plot of the episode is a bit cliched, it is nice to see the creators knowing the opportunities that they have and just completely running free with it instead of waiting a few series to unleash the beasts. Isn't that right, heroes? An episode that makes you glad that you're anyone other than Morty is always a good one.
There's a bunch of people strapped all over that building! Not people, Morty. Mortys.
Number 8. Lawnmower Dog.
What's she saying, Bill?
I think she's saying I love lasagna.
The second episode of the series, this episode made anybody who was a bit unsure about this show from the pilot go, yeah, this is a show I'm going to like. In one of the few episodes where both subplots are equally engaging and fun, Lawnmower Dog is a spoof of two of the most infamous films from the 80s and 90s, the Nightmare on Elm Street films.
Welcome to your nightmare, bitch.
With a completely legally sanctioned version of a character we're not supposed to say the name of.
Ever played Skin the Cat?
But the cherry on the cake is the 1992 stinker, and Stephen King lying infringing piece of shit, Lawnmower Man, with Morty's dog, Snowball, one of the many characters in the show voiced by the great Rob Paulsen, taking his revenge on the human world for treating dogs so cruelly.
Where are my testicles, Summer? They were removed. Where have they gone?
Well, thank God we didn't put those mind helmets on cats then, since not only would they enslave us, but they'd be snobs at the same time. Seriously, sod cats, I hate the bastards. As a great man whose name I can't remember once said, the first episode gets them interested, but the second one pulls them in for good. And given that they chose which order to release the episodes in, I think they did a good job. It's the episode that will make you happy that you've still got your testicles attached to your body! Number 7. Total Recall.
You gotta hide me, Sleepy Gary.
This is another episode that I felt had some wasted potential. Don't get me wrong, it's a great episode, but after watching it the first time, it does get a bit tedious. The plot is that brainwashing parasites have invaded the Smith family house and are disguising themselves as fake members of the family, ones that never existed in the first place, but due to their mind-altering powers, they think that they've known them all their life.
Hey, someone's been spending too much time around glowing rocks, am I right?
An interesting premise to be sure, admittedly not one of the most original, but what really makes it work is how they present the fake family members.
We're walking here!
You know me, I'm reverse giraffe. I have a short neck and legs.
Oh, wow. Baby Wizard was a parasite? He set me up with my wife.
All the parasites are presented as being spoofs of the gimmicky side characters in many family sitcoms, such as Mr. Belvedere, Urkel, Dinosaurs, Different Strokes, and all sorts. There's even references to Mrs. Doubtfire and SpongeBob in there, the character of which is even voiced by SpongeBob's actual voice actor, Tom Kenny.
Wow! Hey everybody, let's give it up for the grill master, Rick!
Plus the style of the episode feels like a spoof of the typical dumb TV sitcom clip show. In short, this episode is the worst nightmare to the classic TGIF and Nickelodeon fanboys, but what really makes it tedious is that we already know who's who. We've been watching these guys for a series and a half now, so we know who the right ones are, so this surreal game of 10 Little Indians doesn't really grip us because we know who the real ones are, and we know who's going to come out on top in the end. Even when they start turning on each other, we know that no one's going to kill Rick, Morty, Summer, Jerry or Beth, though the show does play with the audience's expectation, again like in Rick Potion number 9, an episode that I keep talking about despite the fact that it isn't actually on the list. Sorry, Cronenbergians.
Here we are, Cronenberg Morty. A reality where everyone in the world got genetically Cronenberged. We'll fit right in, Cronenberg Morty.
We still don't expect them to kill off the main characters because there wouldn't be a show after that. Well, unless this episode is written by Reece Shearsmith and Steve Pemberton.
Lines and lines and lines and lines and lines!
Message to Royland and Harmon. Get these guys to write an episode for you. You will not regret it in Series 4. But it's all worth it at the end for when the family goes Halo on the parasites and eradicates them one by one. Ultimately a mixed but still very strong episode. But do spare a thought for Mr. Poopy Butthole. Episode 6. Meeseeks and Destroy. One of the most famous episodes of the series, if only because of the impact it had on the fanbase, as this is the episode to introduce the series' unofficial mascot, Mr. Meeseeks!
I'm Mr. Meeseeks! Look at me!
Enough said right there. But for detail, it is a funny episode just to see how a, on the surface, jubilant and upbeat one-dimensional character who is made solely to serve can become an overworked homicidal maniac just because of how useless Jerry is.
But we will get all strokes off his game! Where's he going? When we kill him!
The subplot of Rick and Morty going on an adventure where Morty is in charge is a great one too, and while it does get a bit too unnecessarily icky and gross at the end, it is still a funny episode and is one of my favourites in the series.
You know, if somebody drops the soap, it's gonna land on our heads and crush our spines, Morty. You know, it'll be really easy to rape us after that.
Plus, it was the first episode to introduce Rick's now immortal catchphrase.
Wubba-lubba-dub-dubs! Yeah! That's my new thing!
Overall, a generally solid episode that is a great testament to show how brilliant this show can be. Just don't overwork it too much, or it will come for you in the night. Number 5. Wedding Squatches.
Weddings are basically funerals with cake. If I wanted to watch someone throw their life away, I'd hang out with Jerry all day.
When it came down to deciding which series finale was best, it was a bit tricky. I did consider Risky Minutes for introducing many of the great reoccurring characters in Series 2, but I have to say, the complete tonal shift for the series finale really hits the squanch on the squanch. Interpret that what you squanch.
I squanch my family. What? I do. I squanch my family.
Stop saying it!
There's not a whole lot I can say about this episode in detail because the big plot twist in the middle really has to be seen to be believed. But what I will say is that this episode truly makes use of all the characters it introduced, with the exception of Revelio Clockberg Jr. And yes, I used his real name as opposed to you Gearus, who would just call him Gearhead. And it really does show that, despite how much of a complete dick he can be, Rick really does care for his family, enough to make the biggest sacrifice he's probably ever made in his life, and left the series on one hell of a cliffhanger to tune in for Series 3, which I will be doing once it comes out on Netflix in about a year's time. Wedding Squanchers. It may not have Vince Vaughn, but at least it also doesn't have Owen Wilson. Number 4. Anatomy Park. Another episode that was clearly inspired by Royland and Harmon's experiences of getting stoned and renting videos from the store every weekend. I'm assuming. Anatomy Park is one of the few episodes where the main story is way better than the side story, by a mile. So this is an ideal episode for Netflix viewers so you can skip the dumb bits and get straight to the nitty gritty. Almost literally in this case. I did think of having something Rickard This Way Comes in this place due to having very similar and creative funny story ideas, but the climax to both of those stories in that episode were quite disappointing. But this one takes at least everything it has from one of its stories and just runs with it all the way, so I felt this was a better choice in that regard. Rick has set up a theme park inside his homeless friend's body, but he's suffering badly from one of the contained illnesses that has escaped its enclosure, and they need to sort things out before things get messy. But considering that they're inside a homeless person, it already has.
Don't move. Gonorrhea can't see us if we don't move. Wait, I was wrong. I was thinking of a T-Rex.
This is probably the best episode to showcase how ingenious the ideas for story and jokes can be in this show. Plus, it's also a testament to how gross it can be before it can force you to want to stop eating your Doritos while watching it.
The Sphincter Dam. We built it when Reuben became incontinent, but it was not designed to hold a corpse load.
Plus, the inclusion of the always talented Tom Oliver from The Daily Show as the Richard Attenborough stand-in is a great thing as well.
Would you like to ride the Bone Train?
Now, who wants to go on the Pirates of the Pancreas ride? Arr, I be defending you from diabetes, matey.
I think it was one of the most underrated attractions.
Booyah!
Number 3. Get Schwifty.
You gotta get Schwifty. You gotta get Schwifty in here. It's time to get Schwifty.
Get Schwifty? What the hell is that?
It's our world's best effort, that's what.
You may have noticed that a lot of my list contains episodes from Series 2, and that's for a very simple reason. Series 2 is awesome. With the first series, you could tell that they were still holding back a little bit with what content and jokes they showed to try and not alienate a more general audience. But with Series 2, that went out the window, and this episode is the best example of them totally going off the rails on a crazy train. I mean, just listen to the premise of this episode. A giant alien head descends down onto Earth, demanding a hit song, which Rick and Morty have to provide because all the artists of the world have been killed in a giant earthquake at the Grammys. So they make one up on the spot with a load of made-up words in front of a giant audience of other giant heads who are part of a massive musical reality TV show that's set in outer space, I might add, and they get the help of the president, who's voiced by Keith David, and Ice-T, who turns out to be an ice-based alien who doesn't care about anything. What are you smoking over there, guys? Because I want some.
Don't analyze it, it's working.
The only downside about this premise is that they didn't take the opportunity to take a jab at Simon Cowell, since he's also a big-headed individual who thinks he's a god with the power over artists' lives and futures. In all seriousness, that is a really creative idea, and while it does sound a bit like something Dali, O'Brien or Warhol would dream up, it does actually really work, and it is probably the most popular episode amongst the fanbase, and for good reason. It's awesome. Plus it does help set up the final development for the last episode, and the inclusion of Bird Person is always great to see. Though since Gearheads hated being called Gearhead by Rick, I do wonder if Bird Person has another name that Rick doesn't use, since he does belong to an entire species of bird people. I hope Rick's not being a racist again.
In bird culture, this is considered a dick move.
All of Rick's moves are dick moves?
So, definitely a good episode. And word up to the Alpha Beatrium posse! Number 2. the Interdimensional TV episodes. You really can't choose between these two, so I decided to put them both on the list. The ultimate testament of how something which seemingly has such little effort involved can still be funny. Oh, I'm sorry, I was just talking about my show. What were we talking about again? The concept is that Rick, in both episodes, tunes the family's cable box into shows that exist in alternate realities, meaning that anything is possible in these shows. Anything. Like about a show where a guy eats shit, or if Garfield had arms on his head, or a show called Ball Fondlers, or if Jerry wasn't an erotic pain in the ass, or if a man was an octopus, or a man fights a car, or... I could go on like this for hours, honestly. The great thing about the shows is that all the shows are done on the fly. The voice actors are just given a concept and just improv it live, and then it's animated, which is not only hilarious, but it just goes to show how talented and funny these guys are.
We got a bag of bobbish. That's 8 grapples. We got a plumbus. That's 6.5 grapples.
And while not every TV show they have is funny...
Oh my god!
Oh, it hurts.
Gross!
What an asshole!
there is always something there that's quite clever.
More personal space next Tuesday at 8. Up next, the heat is turning up with Samantha and the boys on The Northsiders.
And of course we've got the great background stories to go along with them, which are just as funny as the actual shows, to be honest.
Mr. Smith, Shrimply Pibble's life can be saved if we replace his heart with your human penis.
I see. Wait, what?
These are episodes that once again have to be seen to be believed. So we'll leave it at that and go on to the next episode so I can end this and move on to some more ball fondlers. Number 1. Big Trouble in Little Sanchez.
You have the single worst marriage I've ever witnessed. It shouldn't exist. You should never, ever have gotten together, and I do not understand how or why you would ever stay together.
Well, this is just bad couples therapy.
Totally.
A bit of an odd choice, some of you might be thinking, but what makes this episode the best for me is how the side story completely trumps the main story in the creativeness and jokes department, both hands down. And while the main story featuring the now fan favourite Tiny Rick...
Tiny Rick! Tiny Rick! Tiny Rick! Tiny Rick!
is a great story, the side story about Jerry and Beth's marriage getting fixed in the most bizarre, unusual and creative way tops it completely in my opinion.
Read it and weep, bitch.
Does everybody see what I mean?
I think we all see what you both mean.
Episodes focusing on Beth and Jerry's relationship, or some have come to call them Berry, can always be funny. It always gets irritating how every time they seemingly fix it, right after that episode they're back to fighting again. Well, at least they're consistent with how that would actually play out in the real world. But the best one by far is this episode where Beth and Jerry's perception of each other are made real by a mind-reading machine, and their visions of each other are so messed up they start attacking everything in a bid to take over the universe. Yes, I did say that correctly. That is an accurate description of this sub-story.
Get back! Wait, for real? You're how Beth sees me? Oh my god, turn around!
The story's concept just gets higher and higher and smarter until it eventually climaxes in the most incredible way that, again, I won't dare spoil. This episode is truly a testament to the skill and creative ability of these two guys. But in truth, that goes for every episode in this show. It's so brilliant that you just have to watch it. Every episode is amazing, with the exception of the pilot. Don't do that, you know you haven't watched it more than once either. It's definitely one of the greatest shows in the decade in my opinion, and will probably be one of the shows that goes on to define the 2010s, which is saying a lot since the decade still isn't over yet. I can still say that with confidence. And I'm all set for the new series, which is hopefully coming out later this year. But now, I've had enough of this, I'm going on the other side to have a bath. Bye!
The world's